Well, just to check in with you, Maya, I just started my
Oh
bleed.
yeah.
I'm on day two.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a really hard luteal phase. It's felt
Yeah.
like particularly long and dense and heavy. And just in the last few days, I have a really hard time sleeping right before I bleed. I have all of these signs that to like, I kind of know when my bleed is coming because I know how many days my cycle is, but I
Yeah.
always get a pimple 5 days out. So it's like,
Yep.
okay, okay, I'm 5 days out. And then 3 days before I bleed, I have really disturbed sleeps.
Yeah.
And so it just becomes like so obvious when I'm gonna get it. And then as soon as I start bleeding, I can sleep better, my energy is better. Yeah, I just feel this kind of new life. It really feels like the start of a new cycle and just tuning into
Yeah.
that energy.
Yeah.
And yeah, just noticing that up until my bleed, I was like eating a lot. I was really lethargic and slow. And then as soon as I start bleeding, it's like, okay, ready
Yeah.
to go again. Like,
Ready to start building again.
exactly. And it's just that energy
Interesting.
shift is becoming
Yeah.
more and more and more obvious with each passing cycle and with my
Wow.
awareness of it.
Yeah.
I'm just like honestly blown away every time.
Yeah.
Um, that the signals and signs are just getting stronger and clearer and yeah, more
Yeah.
powerful. So I really
Yes.
enjoyed just like witnessing my body move through these changes and have so much awareness around it. Um, yeah. So second day of
Yeah.
my bleed, it's quite my bleed I'm noticing recently is
Yeah.
really stagnant at the beginning.
Mm.
Like there's
Mm-hmm.
often a few days where there's not a lot of movement, and then I bleed kind of heavy for 2 days, and then a lot of stagnancy. And just noticing that, I mean, I've been on this really, really restricted diet for
Mm.
10 months now,
Yeah.
where I don't eat any red meat, I don't have any sex, no
Yeah.
salts, just like this kind of more dense kind of root chakra primal
Yeah.
energy I have been kind of withholding from myself, and I'm noticing it in the way that my body is bleeding and moving.
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting. But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel good. There's new energy, new life coming back in, and yeah, excited. Constantly just
That-
like in awe, in awe.
yeah. That's beautiful how this new life is corresponding with the new moon today or tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
And like that's beautiful because I've been reading up a bit about this, what's happening kind of
Yeah.
cosmologically, because I've been feeling like I'm in my like I'm ovulating, and
Yeah.
I'm just like I think there's like greater things that are affecting me.
Always.
Yeah, and so like yeah, it's just there's a lot of people are saying this new moon is like a reset, and
Mm-hmm.
I just like it's very cool how it's correlating to
Mm-hmm.
your cycle as well.
Always
Yeah.
concentric circles of influence, like we're being
Yes.
influenced by all the tides and shifts
Yeah.
and movements of the
Yeah.
natural world within and without outside
Yeah.
of us. And for the past year or so, I've been bleeding with the full moon and ovulating with the new moon. And just recently it switched over the last two months. I've like
Wow.
switched into bleeding with the new moon, and I can
Wow.
just feel the intensity, like when you line
Yeah.
up with that energy, the
Yeah.
intensity of my cycle is like
Hmm.
matching the lunar cycles so
Yeah.
perfectly that I can drop in so much deeper. It almost like the tides are moving in sync,
Yeah.
like the tides of my
Yeah.
body in tune with the tides of the moon and the tides of the water. And it's
Yeah.
just like really powerful
Yeah.
um, to feel that and notice that shift. And so we're always bringing our awareness to like where the moon is at, where the seasons are at, what the weather
Yeah.
is like
Yeah.
in relationship to my cycle, because that's going
Yeah.
to impact how I
Yeah.
show up and my energy in such a big way.
Yeah.
Hmm. You're ovulating, you said?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, like after learning about how when you ovulate, your testosterone peaks with your estrogen,
Hmm.
I get like a black chin hair. And like
Yep.
I'm like looking at my upper lip. I'm like, wow, I have a lot of hair there right now. And then I have my little witchy chin hairs. And then I made the connection. I'm like, oh my God, I
There's
have
the
my test.
testosterone.
There's the testosterone peaking. And so that was kind of a funny little connection. Uh, this week, I'm like, oh yeah, my testosterone must be peaking. So yeah,
I get those pesky chin hairs too. I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
actually never equated them to because I will often like don't look at myself that close into up in a mirror to
yeah,
notice them.
yeah,
And then I'll like go and do my eyebrows and
yeah,
my whatever, check in. One,
yeah,
but I've actually never, I'm gonna start to notice if it comes
yeah.
out with
So
ovulation now. Thank you for
yeah,
that
you're
awareness.
welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, and so yeah, I've been good, but also a disrupted sleep the past couple nights, but last night I got a really good deep sleep. So I'm feeling much better today. But it's amazing how much not enough sleep can just, it's kind of like I still go through the motions. I just take it extra tender with myself. And I'm kind of like,
Hmm.
yeah, we're just going to do the things, be really tender. And tomorrow's a new day and focus on gratitude because
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
don't have enough sleep right now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm glad this morning to wake up and have had a really deep sleep and be like, like moving on, you know. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
good.
We might not be
Yeah,
synced up in our cycles, but
yeah,
our sleep schedules were super synced because the last few nights I've slept really
yeah.
poorly. And then last night I had such a deep, restful sleep. And I woke up
Oh,
just like, oh, thank you so much. Like, you
right?
don't quite
Yeah,
realize how
yeah,
important sleep is
yeah,
until you're lacking it. And you just see
yeah,
everything start to crumble around you.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Totally. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's me. Yeah, energy's been a little bit low this week, which has been curious because I'm like, oh, I'm like I'm going, like, I'm ovulating, but then I just haven't been reading too much into it.
Yeah.
And like you said, like you had that one friend who kind of like sometimes has a hard time when she's ovulating, like mood wise and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was kind of just reflecting on that and being like, not every ovulation cycle needs to be this like glowy star thing, you know?
For
And
sure.
like I was also reflecting on what you were saying around like grieving the fact that that's another like egg, no baby, right? And I was like,
Uh-huh.
maybe, yeah, like maybe my body's just, I'm entering, like I feel each day sort of moving more into the motherhood phase
Uh-huh.
away from maidenhood. And it's just maybe my body's uh, healing and, calling in, magnetizing in that partner, right? And
Uh-huh.
yeah, so
100%.
yeah. So those are my reflections. But
Thank
yeah, yes,
Thank you for those reflections, and they're really
yes,
good reminders. And especially when we start doing this work and there's all these signs of ovulation that you look for and it's not matching up and you're like, what's wrong? I should be feeling this way. And it's just like we
yeah,
need to step back and be like, there's no
yeah,
expectation on how we should be feeling. It's more like
yeah,
recognizing any patterns that we
yes,
have personally, and
yes,
there might be things that I notice in myself that you also say, but we also
yeah,
might just have our own patterns and our bodies move to our own rhythms.
yeah,
And there's
yeah,
no expectations, like not every summer is going to be the same.
yeah, yes,
Right. And so just
yes,
be open and be curious more than
yeah,
anything. And I love your
exactly.
curiosity
Yeah,
that you're bringing to that. Like, oh, my energy
yeah,
is not super high
yeah,
right now, but I'm at this point in my cycle. Could
yeah,
that be
yeah,
showing to me? And what energetic is
yes.
that bringing up? So I love that awareness.
That compassionate curiosity where
Hmm.
it's like we're welcoming all of us and we're not just feeding one wolf. Like we're feeding both the wolves because we love them both, like
Yeah,
the light and the dark. So, yeah.
always,
Yes.
always,
Thank
always,
you. Yeah.
always. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And I think depending on how your bleed time went and your follicular phase and like what's going
Yeah.
on in your life, it's going to
Yeah.
always affect us. So I feel
Yeah.
like when I'm in balance,
Yeah.
I have a lot of energy in my follicular phase, but when I've been too hard on myself in my moon
Yeah.
time phase, I didn't have
Yeah.
that time of darkness,
Right.
that time of rest,
Yeah.
right? I didn't get that
Yeah.
time of rejuvenation. Like if we're just
Yeah.
go, go, go
Yeah.
365 days a year, like this is why we
Yeah.
have winter, right? We
Yeah.
have this period of rest and recovery, and when you look out into the field over winter, it doesn't look like that much is going on, but there is so
Yeah.
much rejuvenation happening under the
Yeah.
snow, right? It's a
Yeah.
time for the soil to rebuild itself. So I
Yeah.
really take this approach of like our inner winter is a time to like nourish and tend to ourselves. And if we don't sometimes, then we have to do it in other times of the cycle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's just constantly reminding us to like stop
Yeah.
and rest. And
Yeah.
we all need that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
At some point. And either we take it or it's handed to us.
I love that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Totally.
I right before, so I got sick about 2 years ago, and right before I got sick, I was giving a soil talk. So I used to give workshops and presentations on soil health
Yeah.
and gardening, home gardening. And I was giving this presentation, and I was talking about how we always need to leave the fields fallow for a season. Like you
Yeah.
can't take
Yeah.
from the land. There has to be this rest and rejuvenation period.
Yeah.
And I was talking about how to compost, how to mulch, how to tend to the land, how to put the gardens to bed for the winter. And
Yeah.
then so that we can have abundance in the springtime. And then the next week I ended up in the hospital. And I was
Wow.
in recovery. This was October. This was
Wow.
2 years ago. It was
Yeah.
October. And I ended up in the hospital and I was in recovery for 7 months. And then on the spring equinox, my doctor was like, okay, Emily, you can get your license back. You can go back to work. You're good enough.
Wow.
But I
Wow.
literally spent like, I gave that presentation and then I was in the hospital a few days later and I literally spent like the whole winter season in this
Fallow.
deep
Yeah.
fucking rest. Deep
Wow.
rest. Like I couldn't even
Yeah.
cook for myself. I was like
Wow.
totally dependent on
Yeah.
everyone around me. And it was just
Wow.
such a clear lesson that like if we don't
Yeah.
make space for ourselves and take that time, and at that time
Yeah.
I'd gotten a second job that I was about to
Right.
start and I was like go
Yeah.
go go.
Yeah.
And sometimes the body just hands it to you. It's like if you don't if you don't take that time for
Hmm.
yourself, like we all need it, right? It's just a
Yeah.
recognition that we all need it. And
Yeah.
that was just such a clear lesson to me
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
how to move with the seasons and the cycles and how to give
Yeah.
ourselves that time to be left
Yeah.
fallow,
Yeah.
and that being left fallow is so productive, right? We
Yeah.
always think that if we're not
Yeah.
having this like outward expansion,
Yeah.
productivity, getting a lot
Yeah.
done, making a lot of money, that
Yeah.
we're not contributing. But
Yeah.
it's that time of rest that really
Yeah.
provides the like foundation to build from.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was a long-winded answer, but
Oh,
just
beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, it is so true. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share my screen, but of course, keep me in your pocket. I will just
It's great. I can pull, I love your slides, so I can peek at some of them. Yeah.
So the first slide here is just about women as the center point of a society. So it's just a couple images of women, including me, my grandmother, and my mom.
Aw. Yeah.
And I heard this idea of women being the center point of a society, and it's through the teachings of the
Bhagavad
Bhagavad
Gita.
Gita, Bhagavad
Yeah.
Gita.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you read that?
I've read parts of it. I
Parts of it.
haven't
It's a
read the
big
whole
one.
thing.
Yeah.
It's a big
Yeah.
undertaking.
That's
But
a
I've
good inspiration to, because I just get it on the audiobook. Sorry to interrupt. And then
oh, go ahead.
just work away at it because I just walk all the time. So it's like
Yeah.
great way to get information. So that's a good reminder of that book again. But yes, continue, please.
Yeah, I've read snippets of it, and I've spent a lot of time around people that have read it or have been
Yeah,
reading it.
yeah,
And so according to the Bhagavad Gita, women are seen as the pivotal point in a society.
yep,
And when women come out of balance, the society flounders.
exactly.
And this is just this really, when I heard this, it just like hit me like a ton of bricks and really
Yeah,
reaffirmed like a lot of the things that I've always felt deep down.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, hey,
And it also reaffirms to me that like all the work that I do on myself is reflected back outwards in the world I see around me.
yeah,
And so much of the time, like when I've gone to therapy or done lots of healing work, sometimes it feels a little self-obsessed,
yeah,
like
yeah,
focusing all this energy on myself, but it is the best thing that we can do for the world because
yeah,
when we are in balance, it's always reflected outwards.
yeah,
And if women are the pivotal point in a society, then if we're reflecting outwards from a more balanced, secure state, we create a more stable and secure environment for everybody and future generations.
yeah,
So this work and like tending to our cycles and our natural rhythms and healing our body and our psyches and our spirits and our emotional bodies is just such important work. And it's
yeah,
so stabilizing for everyone around us.
yeah,
So why part of the reason why I named this divine nectar is because to refer to something as divine means that it possesses a nature so extraordinary that it inspires awe and admiration. It's looking at ourselves with this divine nature, because our female physiology is something to be regarded with reverence and admiration. And when we connect to our cycles, we begin attuning to this just like divinity that we hold.
yeah,
And it's so powerful once we start to tune into it and start to learn it. And the truth of the universe is woven into our material body, right? Like
yeah.
we are the cycles and the seasons and the
Mhm,
elements all
mhm,
embodied in human form. And this
mhm.
truth and magic is woven into our biology. So when we
Yeah,
start to see ourselves like that and give ourselves that kind of reverence, like
yeah,
it creates huge shifts, not
yeah,
only for our own sense of self, but also for the
yeah,
world around us and for future
yeah,
generations. And so I think it's really amazing that we're living more in our upper chakras.
yeah.
And there's a lot of self-reflecting going on right now. A lot of people talking
Mhm,
about healing trauma and
mhm.
expanding your consciousness. And I think
Yeah,
it's really incredible work. And it's
yeah,
something that our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation didn't really have. They didn't
yeah,
have this
yeah.
self-awareness, this self-reflection, this like drive to just understand oneself.
Mhm,
Um, and so we're living a lot in these upper chakras, but I think what eating does and nutrition does and nourishment does it allows us to come back to our lower chakras. So
mhm.
what my work aims to do is like reach a hand up and down and bring them together. So
Yeah,
connecting mind, body, spirit, right? And
yeah,
we can only expand our consciousness or expand our ability to self-reflect if we actually have the strength of our vessel to hold it.
yeah. And to
And
ground those energies in, like it's an
exactly.
important piece of that for sure. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And we
Mhm,
want to explore and learn and dive into these different realms. But if we can't integrate them into our vessel and if we can't actually make those shifts, then,
mhm.
what's the point?
Yeah,
So
we're just
we
gonna be like manic or something. Like,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I've found with some of the clients that I work with is that sometimes we need to heal our physical body and the imbalances that we may hold before we can heal the emotional and spiritual body. It's
Yeah.
almost like it has to come first.
Yeah.
Um, and so the pillars of health that I really look at are like sleep, which we
Mhm.
both shared. Uh,
Yeah.
but appetite for both food and sex
Yeah.
are other really strong signs of health, digestion, energy levels, and of course, our moon time, right? If
Mhm.
we're cycling regularly, and it doesn't need to mean that you're really, really outwards and magnetic on your in your ovulatory phase, but it means that it needs to be regular.
Mhm.
So that's the sign of vitality is just that there's a rhythm that you're keeping.
Mhm.
So on the presentation there, you probably can't see it too well on your phone, but it's an image of how all the minerals are found in the soil and found in plants. And
Wow.
how this is like one of my favorite images. I like literally printed it
Oh,
out and
gorgeous.
laminated it, and it's like sits
Yeah.
on my fridge.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I'm gonna do the same.
And so it's soil
So
is the
cool.
foundation of nutrition. So like
Yeah.
everything
Nala,
that we
come.
everything that we consume and everything that makes up our being is like from the earth. And so health is about the health of, when we speak about health, it's not just the health of our bodies, it's the health of all life above and below ground.
Yeah.
Like if the rest of the world around us isn't healthy, we can't be healthy either. And what industrial agriculture has done in the last 100 years is that we've created a fossil fuel based warfare on the land.
Yeah.
Like we've isolated ourselves from the rest of nature and we've dominated nature and we don't act like we're part of an ecosystem, right? And when we don't tend to the land and protect the land and care about the health of all living beings, we do that to our own bodies.
Yeah.
Because we are made up of all of the minerals that come from the earth, all of the substance, all of the organisms. Like we are trillions of cells into
Yeah.
one.
We are the land. Like we yeah. Yeah.
And what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. So we genetically modify crops so that they're seedless, so that they taste better, right?
Yeah.
But now, infertility rates are higher than ever, right?
Yeah.
We made our food infertile, and by extension, we've made ourselves, right? So what
Yeah.
we do to the nature, we do to ourselves. So when we think about health, it's the health of all life. If everyone is healthy, every organism, every plant, every tree is healthy around you, you're going to be healthy too.
Yeah.
And so we can't isolate ourselves. And
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways we do this. Um, but to get back to minerals, which is like my
Mm.
focus of health, is that minerals are the fundamental building blocks. They're the roots, the foundation, and the essence of existence. And
Mm.
the Latin word for material, which is where mineral is derived from, is materia, which is derived from mater, which means mother, matrix, vulva, or womb. So, like, the origin of material comes from vulva and womb, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Our
Yeah.
our material bodies come from that space, and minerals, they're the primal material of the universe. They're the essence of life from which we all come from. And when we
Mhm.
remember that we are made up of minerals, we remember that
Yeah.
we are magic too. And in every
Mm.
sense of the world, we defy all logic, yes, yet we exist.
Hey.
And what I really like about mineral work is that every illness and disease comes back to mineral balance. So
Mm.
instead of approaching health as like, oh, I have this allergy or I have this illness or I
Right.
have this disease, it's like, oh no, I have a mineral imbalance.
Yeah.
Right? It's like if all
Yeah.
of our minerals are in balance and operating effectively, then we we're just healthy on a cellular level. And anytime we
Yeah.
are imbalanced, then we start to see our symptoms. And so
Yeah.
minerals, what they're like the spark plugs of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So we have cells and organisms and proteins and enzymes, and they all run off minerals. They aren't activated without the minerals, and we get minerals from the foods that we eat. So I like the quotes, you are what you eat, or you
Yeah.
are what you eat ate. So
Yeah.
we can't eat rocks, which is where the minerals are originally like settle.
Hmm.
But as plants and organisms and bugs, they can eat rocks. And then we eat the fruiting bodies of those plants or of, the animals that ate the plants. And then we absorb them and they come into our body. And the thing about minerals is that they're never born and they can never die.
Yeah.
Minerals are just moving through the world. So when I talk about minerals, I'm talking about vitamins, I'm talking about calcium and phosphorus and all of these
Yeah.
different compounds that are on the table of elements, right? They're the
Yes.
elements that make up our world.
Yeah.
They're in the rocks, they're in the plants,
Yeah.
they're in our bodies, they're in our pee, they're in our sweat, they're everywhere, right? And they
Hmm.
can never be born and they can never be died, but they just move from one life form to another.
Beautiful.
Uh-huh. And based on what we eat, we can select for certain minerals. So when I think about food now and think about diet and think about health, I'm like,
Yeah.
what is the mineral content of the food that I'm eating? I'm not
Yeah.
thinking about how much fat it has or how many
Yeah.
calories it has. Like I'm focused on mineral rich foods because my body knows how to work. If I have the right minerals and the right balance, my body knows how to take these in. It knows
Yeah.
how to manage itself. And minerals, they're the primal material of the universe and they're what
Hmm.
feed us. And
Hmm.
it's an incredibly powerful approach to take to health. And
Yeah.
it works really well. I studied Ayurveda for a little while there, and I
Hmm.
really loved this approach to health of like allowing the cycles and elements of nature to orient your life. So, working with the sun and the moon,
Hmm.
sleep wake cycles, balancing your circadian rhythm,
Hmm.
metabolic cycles, like our every cell in our body is responding to the amount of light that we're exposed to. So I also really like this idea of like light as a nutrient. So
Yeah.
you have your minerals, you have your magnesium and your phosphorus and your calcium and your copper, but you also have vitamin D. You have
Yeah.
sunlight.
Yeah.
And this is also a nutrient that our body needs. So, for example, we can eat foods that are high in vitamin A, but if we don't get exposed to sunlight, our bodies can't turn that vitamin A into a form that we can take up. So there's retinol,
Great.
really
Yeah.
beneficial, but we need to turn it into retinoic acid, and we can't
Yeah.
do that unless we have exposure to sunlight. So I
Yeah.
really like this idea of sunlight as a nutrient, right? It's
Yeah.
not just about what we eat necessarily, but like what time of the day we eat. Whether we
Mm.
got that day, will affect our metabolism. And another
Yeah.
thing that I really like is recognizing that there's these qualities of the sun and moon. So the sun,
Mhm.
it's really penetrating, it's really invigorating, it's
Mm.
really stimulating, right? And so when we eat food, we want to have that our digestion have those qualities, which is why it's
Mhm.
really good to like eat the biggest meal of the day when the sun is
Yeah.
the strongest.
Yes.
Right? So I like to sleep when the moon is out because the moon has these stabilizing, cooling, revitalizing properties to it.
Yeah.
And I like to eat when the sun is at its highest because it has this invigorating, stimulating, fiery quality to it that helps our digestion, that helps us actually break down foods. So
Yeah.
it's learning how to attune to these cycles of nature and orient our life around it. So
Mm.
Ayurveda is all about working with the elements, right? It's working
Yeah.
with earth, water, fire, air, and ether.
Yeah.
And I really like this ancient approach to
Yeah.
health because it takes a similar approach to the minerals where you're not broken, diseased, sick, your earth element is out of balance.
Yes,
Don't-
yeah,
Your earth
yeah,
element is out of balance, and here's all
yeah,
these foods that you can eat, and here's all these things that you can do
yeah.
to bring it back into balance.
I love that so much. And is
Uh,
that like the that tab in the cycle tracker where you added information about the elemental doshas?
that's
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So
I
cool.
and initially I had when I first created Divine Nectar, I had a whole session on Ayurveda, but it's a huge topic to
Yeah.
dive into. And it's like I
Yeah.
realized that I would just have to do its own, it has to be its own thing.
Yeah.
But it's such an important point of my life. And it's just given me such stability and
Yeah.
connection to everything that I do, right? And the doshas you every single living organism has a dosha associated to it, right? Like
Yeah.
every herb and spice
Hmm.
is, is associated with a certain element. And
Yeah.
so for me, like I know I have a very strong pitta, which is my
Yeah.
fire element.
Yes.
And sometimes it can get out of control. And so I work a lot with watermelon and
Yeah.
coconut because they're
Yeah.
really, really cooling to my
Love
pitta.
that. Love
And
that.
sometimes if I want to be more fiery and I want to really accentuate that side of myself, I'll eat really spicy, acidic foods
Yeah.
because I can play with these energies like we always
Yeah.
have. Every time we consume food, every
Yeah.
time we do anything in our life, we're like coming into contact with certain energetics,
Yeah.
right? And so we can pick and choose which energy we want to work with.
Hmm.
So I really, yeah, I just added that in there for anybody that wanted to
Thank you.
explore because it has given me such
Yeah.
a base to work from and
Yeah.
to understand my own tendencies and when to notice where I've come out of balance.
Yeah.
So I just left that there as like a little
Yeah.
breadcrumb, and I love that you
Yeah.
picked it.
Yeah, I definitely picked it up. I would say that like my inner environment has always been quite moist and
Yeah.
like warm and moist. And so um like when I was little, I was like lactose intolerant, to soft dairy and would have a runny nose all the time. And
Hmm.
I just like that's a characteristic of me is just often having a runny nose. And
Yeah.
so, like, that breadcrumb has made me inspired to learn more about that and learn more about the minerals and foods I can eat to dry that up a bit.
Uh-huh,
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, that's
yeah,
such a deep well to dive into, and I love
yeah,
that. Yeah, that
yeah,
sparked some curiosity in you,
yeah,
and just to learn more about that because
yeah,
it's so vast, but also intuitive,
yeah,
right? Like we can really
yeah.
feel you already kind of know which
Yeah, you're
dosha
like,
you are,
yeah,
right? And you
yeah,
already, every time you eat a food, you already kind of know.
yeah,
Um, Yeah, so I'd love to dive deeper into that with you
yeah.
as well.
Mhm.
So would you th say that you're more
Uh,
Vata?
sorry, Vata is water, or
So
sorry, yeah,
Kapha
I,
is earth and water.
yeah,
And then we're all three of them. Like we
yes,
have all the elements within us, but just to varying degrees. So usually when you talk
yes,
about your doshas, it's like you're dominant and you're secondary. So like
yes.
I would say I'm pitta dominant and I'm
Hmm.
kapha secondary, and my vata needs more work. So that air ether element
Yeah, yeah,
needs a little like there's certain points in my life where it's been stronger, but it tends to be one of my weaker points.
yeah,
Not there's nothing wrong with that. It's not, there's no hierarchy, but it's just
yeah,
not what I'm strongest. Whereas
yes,
my partner is all vata, basically.
yeah,
Um, there's also in Ayurveda, you have your Vikriti and you have your Prakriti. So your Vikriti is your original blueprint of your dosha when you were born. And then your Prakriti is like how your life experiences have shifted your balance.
Yeah.
So there's certain times in life where I've been really heavy kapha, but
Yeah.
it's not actually who I naturally am.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
I've just come into that energy.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So playing with that, anyways, it's a huge
Yeah. Yes.
topic.
Yes.
I
Thank you.
realized quickly, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I
if it
love.
sparks interest, like follow
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
follow that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that's really important that I like to bring attention to is that in the health and nutrition space where I work, there's so much talk about what we should consume. You know, what is going to be the best, healthiest, what are the worst foods? And what I really
Yeah.
like to bring attention to is like what we consume is no more important than how we consume it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the state that we're in when we take in nutrients actually affects how we metabolize it.
Yeah.
And so true nourishment is this powerful energy that calms and stabilizes. And we could be eating all of the right foods, but if we're really stressed out,
Yeah.
if we are eating while driving or
Yeah.
doing things at once, like we can't actually receive that nutrients. We're not actually in a receptive state to take in medicine.
Yeah.
Um, Also, the way that we, speak to ourselves and the food that we eat, if we believe that the food that we eat is really nourishing, then it will be
Mm-hmm.
more nourishing. Whereas if we think the food that we're eating is poison, it's going to become that. Energy
Yeah.
always follows thought.
Yeah.
So just being in a really, really calm state and able to actually receive the nutrition that we're trying to provide ourselves with. And, you can eat all of the good foods, but if it's caused you a lot of stress to get there, it's probably not going to be that nourishing.
Yeah.
And this is available to us from food, but it's also available to every interaction that we have from the world. If we aren't open to receive, then we aren't open to true nourishment. And I've found ways that I open myself up to be nourished and to receive nourishment is like saying a prayer before every meal.
Yeah.
Being in a place of gratitude
Yeah.
for food that's nourishing us, thanking the earth that provides us with so much and the sun that provides us with the nutrients that we need for these plants to grow and, the
Yeah.
hands that prepared the food. These are all so important. And eating slowly, it's been a really challenging thing for me to learn how to slow down and eat.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a house with three older brothers, so meal times was always really chaotic.
Yeah.
So learning how to just sit with my food and remind
Mm.
myself this isn't a race, there's going to be enough. Eating
Yeah.
with my hands is really great.
Yeah.
Connecting with my food, like smelling my
Yeah.
food, activating my senses before I eat.
Yeah.
Digestion starts in our eyes and in our nose. When we
Yeah.
see, we start to produce the bile and the digestive enzymes to actually take in this food. And so eating with our hand, touching the food, it turns on our senses.
Yeah.
And then like taking a walk after a heavy meal to
Yeah.
support digestion. So it's not just about what we're eating. Like what we're
Yeah.
eating, one piece of the puzzle, but how we are eating is so important as well. Another piece that I heard recently that just really hit me was if it's happening in your body, it's natural. And this is a really interesting one because we have all of these, our body is always communicating to us. And sometimes our body is out of balance. We have allergies or we eat something and we respond badly to it, or we're sick, or whatever it is. But if it's happening in the body, it's natural. Your body is trying to communicate to you that something's not right,
Yeah.
but it's always natural. And at every moment, our body is communicating to us. And these are messages from God. These are messages from nature. These are
Yeah.
messages from the wisdom of our ancestors, right? And everyone that's passed down their DNA before us. So
Yeah.
thinking mind has often forgotten this magic, but the body remembers.
Yeah.
And we have every single thing in our body that we need already within us, to become well.
Yeah.
And so much of the time, it's about purifying these channels and
Yeah.
unblocking certain experiences or traumas or habits that we have that suppress our knowledge.
Hmm.
And this is why I love tracking so much. And I don't only track like where I'm at in my cycle, I also track like how my digestion is. I track how
Yeah.
my energy level is. I track like who I spent the day with, if I,
Yeah.
because that changes so much of how we feel at the end of the day, our energy
Yeah.
level. All of these things are impacting us, and we don't give enough weight to them. So I love tracking. I'm just so curious about how I show up each day and how everything I interact with affects me. And really, what it's shown me over the years is that I intuitively know, like, we have this intuitive wisdom inside of us already.
Hmm.
And there's a book that I was reading recently called Nourished by Fred Provenza, and he studies the eating behaviors of herbivores specifically.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he knows just from his observations that animals have an innate wisdom within them of what foods they need to eat
Yeah.
at all. Even
Yeah.
if they're domesticated, they have this wisdom. And I think many people believe that they don't have this nutritional wisdom. And because our culture and the foods that we eat are changing so quickly, like we don't eat the same foods that our parents ate, and they don't
Yeah.
eat the same foods that their parents ate. Whereas like 100 years ago, the food wasn't
Yeah.
changing that quickly.
No.
And our cultures and our families were much more close knit. And so we
Yeah.
were eating all of the same foods, but we still have this nutritional wisdom in us. And this book by Fred Provenza, it's called Nourishment. It's what animals
Mhm.
can teach us about rediscovering our nutritional wisdom. So
Beautiful.
it's such a beautiful book. It's full of so
Yeah.
much wisdom, and I'm really,
Yeah.
really loving it. I just,
I'm
just so many,
getting I'm getting on that.
there's books out there to read. It's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
in the chapter that I read last night, he was talking about this herd of sheep. So he's always doing experiments on animals to test whether or not they know. It's this communication between the plants and the animals, and that the animals actually know what to eat and when,
Yeah.
based on what the plants are providing, what they're giving out. And so he tried to do this experiment with his herd of sheep. And what he was going to do is he was going to remove all the phosphorus from his diet, from the sheep's diet, and then provide the sheep with two options, one with phosphorus and one without, and see which one they ate. And that was going to
Yeah.
be the experiment. And so he reduced all the phosphorus in their diet and then was taking their blood, and they weren't reducing in phosphorus. They
Huh.
were, for some reason, he was feeding them and they were still getting phosphorus from somewhere. So he started watching them, and they would reach over into the pen next to them to the sheep that weren't being reduced in phosphorus, and he was eating their feces. And like
Yeah.
this isn't behavior that sheep or any herbivores will do normally, but if
Yeah.
they're really efficient, they will
Yeah.
start to eat dirt. They will start to
Yeah.
eat feces. They will start to eat these things that we think are gross, but they're like, okay, this isn't what I normally eat, but I know that I need this.
Wow.
And so the experiment was to see whether or not they knew which food had phosphorus in it, but the sheep were so far beyond that they, as soon as you started taking phosphorus out of the diet, they went and found it somewhere else.
Hmm.
And even domesticated animals have this wisdom. And so like even us, like we're animals, we
Yeah.
have this primal wisdom, even though we're
Yes.
domesticated, even though, like when we think we're having a craving for Oreo cookies,
Yeah.
but that's also because Oreo cookies have been designed to be the most addictive food,
Yeah.
right? But if we take out all of this noise and all of this salt and sugar and synthetic foods, we
Yeah.
actually, our body knows what it needs.
Yeah.
Um, And this diet that I'm on, it's not like super health focused. It's a diet. It's really interesting because you have to reframe the term diet.
Yeah.
Because right now I'm dieting and I'm dieting with a plant. It's a master plant from the Amazon, and I'm dieting with it to learn how to love myself again and to learn how
Yeah.
to treat myself with the utmost respect. And like,
Yes.
I'm not dieting to lose weight. I'm not dieting
Yeah.
to like be more physically fit. I'm literally dieting because this spirit of this plant teaches me about self-love.
Yeah.
And so it's just such an interesting reframe. But
Yeah.
on this diet, you can't eat any artificial sweeteners or any sugars or any like salts or processed foods. And so part of it is you remove all of these like cravings for salty, sweet
Yeah.
processed foods, but then I get these like really strong cravings for certain minerals. Like my body will be like, wow, you need potassium right now. And I start to crave foods that have potassium in them. And
Yeah.
it's just so interesting.
Yeah.
Once we kind of dull down some of that noise,
Yeah.
how much more we can hear. And so coming back to our cycle, I mean, we're constantly changing throughout the cycle. So there's a time for everything, but it's not always time. And nature never rushes, yet everything gets done.
Yeah.
And in the health space, there's this approach to biohack our way into health.
Yeah.
And I don't like that approach because I don't like
Yeah.
hacking. That feels very masculine, but just
Yeah.
body. And when we're in our estrogen phase, when we're in our first half of our cycle, we can focus on muscle building, we can focus on fat burning, and we can focus on, stress we have more stress resistant. Whereas in the second of our half of our cycle, we actually break down muscle and we build fat and we're more susceptible to stress. So in the health space, there's all of these, different practices like cold plunging and Wim Hof breathing and intermittent fasting. And all of these studies on the health benefits of these things, they're done on men because
Yeah.
it's too hard to study women because
Yeah.
women are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And, cold plunging can be really beneficial depending where you're at in your cycle. Because if our cortisol is high and our cortisol tends to be higher when we're in the second half of our cycle, so our progesterone dominant phase, excess cortisol can be really, really highly stressful on our body. And so maybe in the first half of our cycle, in our follicular phase, we can do lots of cold plunging, but it actually could cause more harm than good in the second half of our cycle.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as coffee. You
Yeah.
know, if coffee releases cortisol, right? And it can interfere with our circadian rhythm. So it's important not to drink coffee first thing when we wake up, especially if we're already susceptible to stress, like we are in our progesterone phase, in our luteal phase.
Yeah.
And something as simple as coffee is like if you just wait 2 hours after you wake up, then it doesn't disrupt your rhythm as much. It
Yeah.
actually moves with your rhythm.
Mm.
And even things like Wim Hof breathing, which I've done for a little while, it's like this very masculine breathwork
Yeah.
technique. But for me, I'm trying to fall deeper into my feminine. It's like, can I just breathe
Yeah.
deeply?
Yeah.
Can I have a really,
Yeah.
really gentle, opening, receptive breaths instead of
Yeah.
always push,
Yeah.
push?
Yes. Yes. That
And so,
resonates.
like, can
Yeah.
I just breathe like I
Yeah.
love myself and like breathe
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
space, like open myself up instead of
And
like,
like not pushing and breathing like that because something's deficient or I'm not doing like my body, like I got to push my
Mhm.
body back into being better or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there's just so much of that in the health space and all of these
Yeah.
different practices. And, I don't condemn them, but I just think
No.
it's really important to have awareness of like
Yeah.
where your body is at and like cortisol, we're under so much stress all of the time already. Like we
Yeah.
don't have acute stressors like,
Yeah.
our ancestors might have.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have shelter and a place to sleep, most of us.
Yeah.
Um, but we're constantly inundated with these like low level stressors. So our cortisol levels are already up. So
Yeah.
especially when we're in our progesterone phases, we're more susceptible to stress. Our cortisol levels are already higher. So if we're engaging in these activities that stress us out even more, we're actually using pregnenolone, right, which
Yeah.
is the mother
Yeah.
of all hormones. It always is going to prioritize cortisol. And it means that there's only a limited supply of pregnenolone, of that mother hormone, and it's always going to prioritize cortisol because that's an anti-inflammatory and it's more a trigger of survival, whereas reproduction isn't that. It's kind of second tier. And so
Yeah.
it can throw, if we're constantly exposing ourselves to these cortisol surges, it can actually have like long-term impacts on our hormones and our
Yeah.
minerals and bring them out of balance.
Yeah.
So just having this body awareness and knowing when you can engage in those more stressful activities.
Mhm.
So I focus a lot on health at a cellular level. And when we think about minerals, I like to think of them as the currency of our body, and they
Mhm.
provide our cells with energy.
Mhm.
And we've become a society in the last 100 years of overfed and undernourished. So while we
Yeah.
have access to a lot of calories,
Yeah.
um, our food is lacking nourishment.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so we're eating, 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 thinking that we're not getting enough, but it's just because our food is empty. So I really try and prioritize in my practice like nutrient-rich foods. And
Mhm.
fat from animal tissue is one of the most nutrient-rich food sources. And in our day and age, like fat has become really demonized. I think
Yeah.
especially for women,
Yeah.
fat has become demonized
Mhm.
because there's this idea that fat makes you fat. And when you actually break it down to a cellular level,
Yeah.
um, fat provides us with energy. And
Yeah.
so when we oxidize fat, we produce 140 units of energy versus when you oxidize glucose, sugars, you produce 34 units of energy. So there's 4 times more energy
Yeah.
that's created from fat than there is glucose. So, and there's also way more mineral value in fats, animal fats, than there is in carbs.
Mm.
And so
Mhm.
we think that fat makes us fat, but it actually gives us energy. And it gives
Yeah.
us sustained energy and it gives
Mm.
us minerals
Yeah.
and all of the antioxidants that our body needs.
Mm.
I've shared this with you before, Maya, but I really like talking about mitochondrial health.
Yeah.
And so if you think of a cell, an average cell, I mean, like you saw diagrams in probably science class where there's a
Yeah.
cell and you see the mitochondria, and there's usually 1 or 2 mitochondria floating around. But
Yeah.
the average cell has about 100 mitochondria.
Ha, I
And
did
so
not know that.
those diagrams are just
Yeah.
completely off.
Yeah.
The average cell has about 100 mitochondria in it, and those are the energy, those are it's what
Powerhouse.
the powerhouses of the
Yeah.
cell. Right?
Yeah.
And so an average sperm cell, just for reference, has about 50 to 75. So it has less than the average cell
Yeah.
mitochondria. A muscle cell has about 1,000. So muscles need to work, right? They expand and
Yeah.
contract. So they need more mitochondria. They need more of that power. Uh, Heart cells, which are constantly pumping,
Yeah.
they have about 5,000. So that's a lot more than the average cell. The average cell has about 100. Heart cells
Yeah.
have about 5,000.
Wow.
Female reproductive cells
Lay it
have
on me.
600,000.
I love that.
So let's just like,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
just sit with that for a moment.
Yeah.
Our these are the powerhouses of
Yeah.
ourselves. These are what creates energy and makes everything run and move.
Yeah.
And it takes minerals,
Yeah.
particularly magnesium, copper,
Yeah.
and iron,
Yeah.
to make these cells move, to make them operate for us to be able to create ATP in our mitochondria. Like we
Yeah.
need minerals to activate these.
Wow.
And we have so many of these mitochondria in our bodies at all time working away. And so
Yeah.
how do we actually support them?
Yeah.
How do we support them in making energy? Because if we make energy, if we're making energy efficiently, like our body has an innate wisdom that it can clear, like we're exposed to
Yeah.
toxins and we
Yeah.
have our own imbalances. But if we're making enough energy, if our
Yeah.
mitochondria are
Yeah.
working effectively, like our body knows how to.
Yeah.
And so
They're just
really,
so efficient at clearing and
mm,
detoxing. Yeah.
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
what the body, that's what our liver,
Right.
all of the mitochondria in our liver, that's what they're doing. They're making energy
Yeah.
so that our liver can detox.
Yeah.
And if we have that energy, then we can come into contact with toxins and poisons and, our environment and we can clear it through. Like
Yeah.
that's what our immune system is here to do. That's why our liver is there,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
I had a client recently that had her gallbladder removed, and it was like, you know, the amount of gallbladder removals is just baffling to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
The approach is, oh, we'll just remove the organ. And like, that's never the answer. There's
Yeah.
always something that comes first before
Yeah.
actually removing the organ.
Yeah.
Because it's there for a reason, and now she can't digest fats because she doesn't have a gallbladder.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's just so
Yeah.
and this really comes back to like my issues and why I do the work that I do is that I have a lot of issues with Western medicine. And
Yeah.
Western medicine really has this approach to health of like, we fight diseases, we fight
Yeah.
infections, we don't
Yeah.
invigorate health. And my
Yeah.
approach to health is always strengthen the host, don't
Yeah.
attack the guest. Because if the
Yeah.
host is strong,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
has resiliency. But
Yeah.
so much of our Western medical model is like prescribe medication
Yeah.
like antibiotics is literally anti-life,
Yeah.
right? It's like
It kills everything.
it kills everything. And
Yeah.
we like everything,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's a lot of those cells that like just those organisms in our body that if we go through and
Yeah.
we kill them, we just make us more susceptible to infection down the line.
Yeah. When I had my like an infection on my cervix,
Yeah.
and I was doing energy work, we were like talking to like my right ovary, my left ovary, like we were talking to my reproductive system. And
Yeah.
her approach was the same, like we are gonna talk to ourselves, and like she was explaining how it's like don't lose hope because reproductive cells are the most like mutable in the body. They
Mhm.
respond the best, and maybe that has something to do with having that many mitochondria, like they're just able to change or something.
Mhm.
But anyways, we were talking to my body, like, and she was saying the same thing, like you don't need this anymore. You don't need this infection, and we can encourage your cervix to become an environment where this infection can't flourish. Like, and that's how we'll just transform it. Like, you don't need it anymore. And your body can be a place where it just can't grow. And I really loved that instead of,
Mhm.
yeah. And then Western medicine was like, cut it off. Just cut it out.
Cut it out. We don't need it anymore. It's
Yeah.
infected. And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And it
just,
was, yeah, I had been doing that energy work for 3 months. I think I already told you. And then when they cut it out, because I was afraid. I was like, you know what? Like, I don't want to get a whole hysterectomy. Like, I might need a little bit of help, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and it, you know, it's not a lot. It's a tiny slice. It was like a LEAP procedure.
Yeah.
And when they cut it out and they analyzed the folds and the samples, they couldn't find any of the cells that
Yeah.
were the precancerous cells. And I'm like, wow, like
Uh-huh.
interesting, right?
And
Yeah,
doesn't that just show you the power of the body and the power of
yeah,
energy work and the power of
yeah,
like actually speaking to your body and like
yeah.
your cells? So
Asking.
in
Yeah,
this Fred Provenza book that I'm
yeah.
reading, uh, he talks about a woman who gets a heart transplant, and I found this just so fascinating. And she goes in to get her heart transplant. And right after she comes out of surgery, she wakes up, and the doctor says, "What do you feel like eating?" And the first thing she says is, "I feel like a beer." And right in that moment, she's like, "Wait a minute, I don't even like beer." And she started, after this heart transplant, she started having all of these cravings that she'd never had before. And so she started digging and she found who her transplantee was. And it was
Yeah,
this 22-year-old guy that died in a motorcycle accident,
yeah.
but met his family and started to learn more about him. And she was having all of these cravings
Wow.
that were his.
Yeah. Oh
You
my
know, and like
God.
we
Yeah,
hold so much
yeah,
information in every single one of our cells,
yeah,
right? Like every
yeah,
single one of our cells, the way
yeah,
that we speak to our cells, you
yeah,
know, they hold memory,
yeah,
right? They hold memory, they hold our DNA. So, you know, we just the power of energy work and the power of actually
yeah,
speaking to your body and trusting your body, right? And I know
yeah,
how it feels and I know why you went ahead with
yeah,
getting it
yeah,
removed because there's fear
yeah,
there. And like fear
yeah.
is very fucking powerful. And also,
Totally.
you know, your whole life you've probably been told that, you know, Western medicine knows best,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so I 100% understand, but it's such a good
yeah,
lesson of learning
yeah,
how to trust your body and the power of your thoughts, the power of your intention, the power of your voice and speaking to yourselves and being able to actually clear it on your own.
yeah,
Hmm. Yeah. And thanks for sharing that story. It's really powerful. And
yeah,
I imagine also the green that came out in your
yeah,
district was also oxidized copper.
yeah,
So it's copper that's become oxidized in your uterus and your body's
yeah,
like pushing it out. It's like we
yeah,
don't. Hmm. Because copper can be beneficial if it's in the right place, but in that
yeah,
setting it wasn't. So the body was like, we are letting this go.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
And the body will do that, you know? It's
yeah.
like learning how to trust the body to be able to do that. But our education system doesn't teach us that. And doctors aren't even taught that, you know? Doctors, medical doctors aren't taught nutrition, right?
Yeah.
And
Thought
the West.
about the vagus nerve system either. I don't think,
Hmm.
which is like wild because that kind of runs the show
Yeah,
in
so
many
much.
ways. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
and stress has a huge, huge impact on our minerals
yeah,
as well. And so we know how much stress affects us, but there's different types of stress. There's psychological stress, there's physical stress, there's environmental stress. So molds, exposure to, you know, toxins in our environment. If we live near a place that's spraying lots of pesticides or has
yeah,
mining, whatever, there's environmental stresses everywhere. And then there's metabolic stress. So coming back to this mitochondria, metabolic stress is if our body's not producing energy correctly, it's actually creating exhaust. And that's causing more stress in our body. So if we're producing energy effectively, that relieves a lot of the stress in our body.
mm,
But if there's pathways that aren't flowing smoothly, that creates
yeah,
a buildup of stress, oxidative stress,
right,
reactive oxygen species. Those are created in the metabolic process.
mm,
And when we have excess stress hormones, it steals minerals and pregnenolone, which we talked about. So cortisol steals pregnenolone from other hormones
Huh.
being created from our estrogen and our progesterone production, but it also steals minerals. So in the mineral space, we call it the magnesium burn rate.
Huh.
Because magnesium is always the first thing to go. And it's the thing that our body needs most readily, and it needs to be replenished constantly. And when I was really sick, I got out of the hospital and I had a really long recovery, but all that time for the year after I was, diagnosed and
Yeah.
treated, it was all about learning how to reduce the amount of stress in my environment, reduce the
Yeah.
amount of stress on my body. I went back to work, but I only went back to work part-time.
Yeah.
I was doing things constantly to regulate my nervous system. I, never put myself in stressful situations and just allowed my body to be able to process without putting it under more stress.
Yeah.
Because stress is depleting to our minerals and depleting to our hormones and throws everything out of balance. And magnesium is always the first mineral to go. And so as soon as we become magnesium deficient, and just for reference, 80% of the population is magnesium deficient. No one is
Right.
getting the amount of magnesium that we need in the world today. And so for reference, there's 9,000 enzymes that run our body,
Right.
and magnesium is needed for 4,000 of them. So
No.
basically half of
Okay.
all of the functions, the proteins, the enzymes in our body, half of them need magnesium, and 80% of us are magnesium deficient.
Wow.
And when we become magnesium deficient, we have a very different response to stress. So
Yeah.
our food has lower levels of magnesium due to agricultural practices, modern
Yeah.
food processing practices. When we become more magnesium deficient, it makes us more vulnerable to stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
And stress causes more magnesium loss through our kidneys and our urine and our sweat.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you're under stress, your sweat starts to smell different.
Yes. a
Uh,
100%.
and so you actually, when you're under stress, your body's actually burning through minerals and it's letting them
Yeah.
go. It's
Yeah.
like the stress causes you to use more minerals. You're creating more cortisol. You're creating more
Yes.
adrenaline in your hormones, and you're actually using minerals for that process.
Yeah.
And so this is this constant cycle of we're already magnesium deficient, and then that
Uh-huh.
causes us to be less resistant to stress, which makes us more magnesium deficient. And so magnesium is the most important mineral.
What are some naturally like magnesium rich foods?
Well, if you were looking at the screen, you would see the list of it, but I'm going to
Okay,
name them. I'm going to
I will
name
take a
them.
look. Okay.
I'm going to name them, but you can take a screenshot too, and or I could send you this.
Okay.
It's also on my Instagram.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll send it
Oh,
to you,
look at
but
that. Yeah.
dark leafy greens.
Yeah.
So collards, beet greens, mustard greens, spinach, kale. Those are all great sources of magnesium, especially if they're cooked in animal fat. So when I talk about
Oh,
fat, I
awesome.
talk about from animal tissue. So I'm talking about saturated fats. I'm talking about the fats that are hard at room temperature. We don't
Yeah.
want canola oil. We don't
No.
want seed oils. Like we want saturated fats.
Yeah.
Our body knows how to use those fats, and they're also filled with other minerals and nutrients. And magnesium likes to be absorbed in that way. Um,
Hmm.
so dark leafy greens, great. Chocolate, as long as
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
high cacao. So I
Yeah.
say 80% or more.
Yeah.
Chocolate's really good. Red wine is also a good one,
Yeah.
surprisingly, but I'm not like, it still has alcohol in it, which is an
Yeah.
anti-nutrient, but
Yeah.
it's full of antioxidants. Nuts and seeds like cashews, almonds, pistachios, and pumpkins.
Yeah.
And then your whole grains, especially buckwheat, millet, and wild rice, which are a little bit harder to find, but
Yeah.
you can still find them. And then seafood, kelp, and oysters are
Yeah.
great.
Hmm.
So those are your kind of food-based magnesium sources. I
Yeah.
also supplement magnesium, but
Yeah,
this is
me
the
too.
thing with minerals is that they never act alone.
Yeah.
Um, they act as a web, and just like nature, everything's interconnected.
Yeah.
You put on one and it affects everything else in the web.
Yeah.
And so if we're taking magnesium in isolation, I think that everyone needs magnesium.
Yeah.
80% of the population is deficient. There's no way you can really be getting it from your diet, even if you're really mindful about sourcing from organic and regenerative farms and making sure there's lots of diversity and that the soil has lots of, the soil is full of life because that's what's going to
Yeah.
provide our minerals to us.
Yeah.
But taking isolated supplements can cause more harm if we don't know what's happening with our minerals. And so magnesium is part of the electrolyte group, so it's with
Yeah.
magnesium, calcium, sodium, and potassium. And if we are just taking magnesium and not making sure that we're getting the other electrolytes, it can throw our adrenals out of balance, which can cause more magnesium deficiency.
Okay.
And so this is where it gets really complicated, and this is the work that I do, right? I help people understand their mineral
Yeah.
makeup and how to eat foods and take supplements for their body,
Yeah.
right? Because so much
Yeah.
of the vitamins and minerals is just like take this daily multivitamin, but it's not actually how it works because everything's interacting with each other. And so, for example, like you can't take a calcium supplement that doesn't have magnesium in it because the body doesn't know how to take in calcium if there's no magnesium. So
Right.
they always come in pairs.
Yeah.
And people are taking isolated supplements and it's actually
Yeah.
causing more damage, even though they think that they're doing the right thing. So another thing that's really important is fortified foods can be really
Right.
problematic because nature always puts things in the right balance.
Right.
For example, you need to have vitamin A if your body's going to take in vitamin D. So there are certain foods that have naturally occurring vitamin D in it. And for example, cod liver oil is a good one. It
Yeah.
has a lot of naturally occurring vitamin A and vitamin D, but it always has 10 times more A than D because the body can't absorb vitamin D if there's not vitamin A as well. And so people taking, you know, thousands of UGs of vitamin D by
Right.
itself is really, really, really dangerous.
Right.
And supplements are not regulated. And so everyone knows that the soil is deficient and our food is lacking nutrients. So everyone's taking supplements, but they don't actually understand what they're doing. And it can
Mhm.
actually wreak havoc on our minerals.
Yeah.
I recognize that I'm going over time, but
Yeah.
one thing I really want to talk about is iron. And
Yeah.
iron is one of the most toxic metals. So a lot of people think that they're iron deficient, especially women, especially menstruating women, are
Yeah.
often told that they are anemic, that they bleed every month and they're losing too much iron. And we need iron, it moves oxygen around our body. However, the body holds really tightly onto iron. Because we need it to move oxygen around the body over time, from the wisdom of our ancestors, has learned how to hold on to iron because we might go a day or two without eating, if we don't have a hunt.
Mhm.
So the body holds on to iron.
Mhm.
Whereas things like magnesium, potassium, sodium, calcium, the body is constantly letting go of it and needing to be replenished. So
Mhm.
you can find magnesium in your hair, in your nails, in your urine, and in your sweat. The body is constantly letting it go, and then you have to replenish it.
Mhm.
The thing with iron is there's no way to get it out of the body once it's in.
Yeah.
So the only way to get iron out of your body is through blood loss.
Yeah. So can I just share something quickly?
Yes, please.
Okay, my dad is like really out of balance and has been out of balance for his whole life. Um, but he's like part of that manifesting is being quite overweight and having a complicated relationship with food, an addictive relationship with food where it helps him
Hmm.
numb out and he eats really quickly. But it's interesting how that manifested in an iron, uh, like an excess of iron. And so he actually had way too much in his system and had to go get blood taken for
Hmm.
like periodically for like a year. And
Yeah.
energetically and emotionally, I just thought that like even not knowing much about like about it, just intuitively, I was like, oh my gosh, like he's so dense, like the
Hmm.
density and the armor, the inner armor to protect himself from like living in a toxic relationship and continuing to share the same house for over 30
Uh-huh.
years, right? I'm like, wow, like, and so yeah, that was my first encounter with an excess of iron, and that's how he had to
Mhm.
get bloodlet. Yeah, so
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. I find it so interesting. And when you think about iron, so there's just this kind of so many women in the world think that they're deficient in iron
yeah.
and are taking iron supplements, are we're fortifying our foods with iron. And iron is it is the most abundant element on Earth. So like our Earth, the Earth's crust, um, and all of the minerals and what's made up of our Earth, there's 35% of Earth's total mass is iron. And so it's
Wow.
just crazy to me that it's the most abundant element, it's the most abundant mineral, but half the world is deficient, right?
Hmm.
So there's so much iron fortification in food.
Hmm.
I struggle to find flour that isn't fortified with iron. Like I bake all
Hmm.
my own bread, but I can't buy any flour because it's all been fortified with iron and what these food companies do is that they literally take like imagine if you can imagine cast iron shavings
Yeah.
and they put it in the bread. You can literally
Wow.
get cereal and you can crush it up and put it in a bag and you can take a magnet and
Wow.
all of the iron in the cereal will latch on to the magnet. Like
Wow.
there is just an abundance of iron in our food,
Hmm.
and the body doesn't use that much iron. The
Hmm.
body, if it's operating correctly, the body uses 1 milligram of iron a day. And there's so much more in our food than we need. And the body actually stores it. And so if it's not regulated, if it's not, we need it recycles oxygen, right? It moves through our red blood cells. But if it's
Hmm.
not regulated, it gets stored in our tissues and it leads to the creation of oxidative stress. And how I like to picture it is like if you leave a nail outside and it gets
Hmm.
exposed to oxygen, it starts to rust.
Hmm.
And so many of us actually have an excess of iron in our body and we're rusting from the inside out. And I can kind of
Hmm.
imagine your dad having just like this
Yeah.
buildup of rust and this caking and this just like lack of
Yeah. Yeah.
fluidity and
Yeah. Yeah.
emotional like
Yeah.
compaction going on,
Yeah.
you know, and there's always an
Yes.
emotional component to the
Yes.
physical.
Yeah.
How is he doing now?
Um, he's looking forward to having us home for the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Like both my brother and I are have quite healthy routines.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's looking forward to like having that energy and just like nice love and healthy structure around.
Yeah.
So that's good. He's looking forward to that. But yeah, my mom is just like really holds on to a lot of resentment and she's like chronically stressed. She just
Mm-hmm.
like has a really hard time regulating that and is also imbalanced. And then
Yeah.
just like really just points it on him. And like
Yeah.
he was really bad growing up. So, but he's healed a lot. And
Mhm.
He's gotten better, but unfortunately, she just like is pretty like takes it like is pretty mean to him, and so I
Yeah.
think that's hard to be around day in and day out. But
Mm-hmm.
they have their own, like they're both grown, and I've said many times like you guys can live separately, but they're in this like little well big dance and dynamic, and
Of course.
there's a lot of quote unquote obligation and like quote unquote loyalty, and just like not a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that compassion and loving kindness and understanding and openness, because I think they're both pretty compacted and rusty,
Yeah.
and yeah, so
It's
yeah,
interesting when you're talking about your mom, I got
yeah,
the emotions that you spoke about her too are
yeah,
very
yeah,
consistent with excess calcium. So
yeah,
there's working in this mineral space, I
interesting.
share with all the other consultants that do
Hmm.
mineral work, and there's a very clear like emotional pattern associated with certain mineral excesses or deficiencies. And yeah, as you were talking about your mom, I kept
Yeah,
getting the signs of calcium excess. So you become
excess,
very
yeah,
like calcium is the mineral of cement,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it gets very hard and rigid and
yeah,
stuck.
yeah.
Hmm.
Wow,
And
that's very interesting. Thank you.
yeah. My teacher often says, there's a reason why women live longer than men, and it's because we
Mhm.
have our monthly bleed. And
Right.
so, because our food is so fortified with iron and we're getting way too much of it, and it's storing in our tissues and it's creating oxidative stress in our body, which leads to a lot of imbalances,
Mhm.
the fact that we have our monthly bleed actually allows us to detox iron.
Yeah.
It actually allows us to let go of excess iron that's causing
Mm,
us a lot of imbalance and just like throwing off our system and leading to more mineral dysregulation and mineral deficiencies. And
mm,
copper is the thing that helps regulate iron and it
mm,
helps get it out of the body. However, in the last 50 years, our diet has become extremely deficient in copper.
mm,
And so
mhm,
we're a lot of the times we're iron toxic and we're copper deficient and
mm,
magnesium deficient. And so really what my work focuses on, I look at those, but the ones that I really focus are magnesium, copper, and iron.
mhm,
And so what I do as a practice, like I do divine nectar on the side, but on my day to day, I work with a lab and I send hair samples to the laboratory and they give me readings of the minerals. So I look at calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, zinc, phosphorus, iron, manganese, all of these different minerals, and then also like toxic elements. So a lot of the time, if we're exposed to mercury or aluminum, uranium, arsenic, those will come up in your hair samples as well. And then I work through with clients like where the balance is off and how to bring them back into balance with diet and lifestyle changes that will just replenish the body.
that is so cool, Emily.
I mean, it's just crazy to even say that out loud. And it's amazing to come, like, just that this exists, right? Because so much of the time we go to our doctors and we're like, I feel fatigued or this feels off. And they want to prescribe us medication or give us this pill. And so much of the times it's like you never look at actually your lifestyle. You never look at the emotional aspect of it. So a lot of the work that I do with clients is like therapeutic as well, because if you have an excess of calcium, you're holding on to too many emotions. You're not actually letting your emotions move through
Yeah,
like
yeah,
freely. And as
yeah.
we do the emotional work, your minerals start to come back into balance. And it's
Wow.
just this understanding that like everything's interconnected and what you're eating, how you sleep, how you relate to your loved ones and the relationships that you have, they're affecting our minerals on all different levels, the water that you drink. So a sign
Mhm,
that someone is mineral deficient is if they're thirsty all of the time. And
mhm.
we have this idea that we need to drink 8 glasses of water a day to stay healthy. But our ancestors, they didn't, no one walked around with giant water bottles. No one was drinking that much water. It's actually relatively new that we think that we're thirsty all of the time, but we would actually get our minerals from water. So before they started filtering our water and putting all of these, chemicals in our water, it's where our sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium would come from.
Mm,
It was in the water. And so
mhm,
if we're thirsty all of the time, it's actually a sign that our body is craving these minerals. And so I
mm,
work with clients and I look at their hair tests and I look at their, practices and daily habits. And I work through like how to bring our minerals back into balance. And once our minerals are back into balance, like everything balances out. And
mm,
so while it's important, a lot of practitioners, especially talking about moon time, they'll say like it's important to have magnesium before you bleed, but it's important to have magnesium all the time, you know?
mhm,
So there's not something specifically to do and to eat with your cycle, but just like for me, it's more like moving through like the doshas, understanding the doshas and
mm,
every single phase of our cycle is associated with a certain element. So,
mm,
ovulation is associated with pitta, right? It's the fire
mhm,
element.
mhm,
And so if you want to like ramp that up, there's certain fire element foods that you can eat, or you can bring it down. Or if you
mm,
notice imbalance in your diet, like I have really stagnant blood right now. Like my blood, I really like to see my blood to be like really, strong and bright and
yeah,
like flowing. And right now
yeah,
it's like kind of brown and
mhm,
it's kind of stagnant. It's not flowing super well. And that's a sign of vata imbalance. And so like I already know that I have a bit of a vata imbalance.
mhm,
So
mhm,
just, eating more vata, balancing foods, more soups, more
yeah,
stews, more
yeah,
density, like more liquid. Vata
mhm,
imbalance is very airy, it's very dry. So like
mhm,
moisturizing,
mhm,
massages, like those are what's going to bring more balance to my cycle and just my being in general.
mhm,
Um, and so I can't tell you like there's certain foods that you should necessarily eat at certain times in your cycle for your minerals, but
mhm,
I like my work is like teaching me people how to nourish their body based on like the mineral content of food. And it's not specific to your cycle, but it's just having that awareness in general will balance everything.
yeah,
Yeah. And if you wanted to do a session with me, I offer free consults where we just look
mhm,
at your habits.
mhm,
And if you take any supplements and like just like want advice on like which supplements to take, what are most
mhm,
bioavailable to the body. So one thing I really like is transdermal magnesium. So the body likes to get many different forms of magnesium. Um, and one way you can take that in is through your skin. And so
mm,
getting creams and ointments that have creams and oils that have magnesium in them, and then you can absorb them through your skin, and that actually becomes more bioavailable than
mm.
taking a supplement.
I love that.
hmm Another
Mhm,
thing, I talked about the castor oil packs last week.
mhm, mhm,
So that's really detoxing for the liver, and our liver is overburdened because we're exposed to more toxins than we were before. And so our liver
mhm,
has to work overtime.
mhm,
And liver is one of the main places that iron gets stored.
mm,
And the castor oil packs actually help detox iron from the liver. And so
mm,
there's lots of little things and like little tips and tricks. And what I love so much about my work is that there's no negative repercussions.
mm,
Like you take antibiotics for an infection and it completely fucks up your gut flora. I read
mhm,
recently that for women, your chances of depression increase by 25% after you take antibiotics.
mhm,
And just like things like that. And every single medication has all of these side effects,
mhm,
like just lists and lists of side effects. And so we don't actually know what we might be healing one thing, but we're causing more damage down the line. And with mineral work and with changing your diet and your habits, like there's no negative implications.
mhm,
Mhm.
mhm,
So my prompts for today was, do you know what kind of diet your grandmother ate? And
mhm,
why I bring this up is because we get that mitochondria, those mitochondria that are the powerhouses of our cell that we have, billions and billions and billions of, and
Mhm,
600,000 in our reproductive cells.
mhm,
Um, the the DNA from our mitochondria comes directly through our maternal lineage. So
mm,
your DNA
mhm.
of your mitochondria, the powerhouse, the energy machines, you don't
Mhm.
get any of that from your father. It
Yeah,
always comes from the mother.
yeah.
And so your mitochondria, which help run your metabolism and create energy, it's all created in your grandmother.
Mhm,
And so if you're ever not sure what to eat and you don't feel like your food is nourishing you or you're not doing something right, like always come back to your ancestors. What did your
mhm,
grandmother eat? Because that
mhm,
informs the DNA that powers your cells.
mhm.
Hmm.
Love that.
Yeah. And then what element do you feel the most connected to? Like,
Mm,
I think is another good place to start and just like
mhm,
starting to explore diet and nutrition from this approach.
mhm, mm. I love that. Um, I'm curious about potassium.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and then I'm actually at the grocery store right now because I'm craving kale. Um,
Haha.
kale and eggs. So I'm gonna get some
Yeah.
dark leafy green vegetables and
Nice.
get some more eggs in the house, so that'll be nice. Um,
I
yeah.
had I had a really beautiful experience this morning with eggs. So I'm on my second day of my bleed, and
Mhm.
my Matt and I, we always go to the market on Sunday and we get a
Mhm.
bunch of eggs for the week. But
Mhm.
this morning we're almost out of eggs, so there was
Mhm.
only 3 eggs left, and we eat like
Mhm.
4 eggs a day each.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
eat ridiculous
Yeah.
amounts of eggs. And I
Yeah.
came down and he had made me breakfast and he'd given me all the eggs. And I was like, "You're not having eggs?" And he was like, "You're on your bleed. You need it more than I do." And I was just
We
like,
love
"Oh,
that.
oh my God." I was like,
Yeah.
wow, how have I gotten to this place where he's like, "You're on your moon time. You need more nutrition, your body's working overtime. I'll give you the eggs." And it's just like that awareness. I'm just like, God, I feel blessed.
Yeah. That's a keeper for sure.
Yeah, that's a keeper for sure.
I love that.
Another
That's
thing,
beautiful. Mhm.
another thing that I do is called muscle testing.
Mhm.
And so if I'm ever not sure what my body's craving or what it needs, I'll
Mhm.
hold food or supplements or anything really. I'll hold it up against my chest or like right
Mhm.
underneath my breastbone, kind of where my solar
Mhm.
plexus is. And I'll
Mhm.
stand there and I'll see if my body, if I just stand still, I'll see if my body pulls in or
Mm.
my body rejects it. So there's
Mhm.
often like a very clear pull in one way or the other. So I'll just hold
Yeah.
whatever it is and I'll say like, I take supplements every morning. I take cod liver oil and I take boron and all these
Mm.
different things because I know where my body's at and what it needs. And
Mhm.
but even before I take it, I think I know what I need, from a
Mhm.
mental place.
Yeah.
But I stand there and I hold it next to my body and I say, is this what we need right now? And I let
Mhm.
my body either fall into it or push away from it.
Mhm.
And it's just coming back to that wisdom of our body and like knowing that our body is drawn to certain things and repelled by other things. And there's a
Yeah.
reason why it is. Um,
Mhm.
and that's a practice that I like and it's very obvious to me whether my
Mhm.
body is wanting that.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's a really good practice. I'm gonna start doing that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's good when there's a little bit of confusion and I
Yeah.
feel like it just sets it straight. And like our mind thinks it knows what it needs and I have a really
Yeah.
hard time even with the muscle testing. I
Mhm.
like, do it and I think that my body needs it and I ask and
Mhm.
it repels it. I'm like, "Are you sure?" you know?
Yeah.
But it's really coming back to this wisdom of our body and learning how to trust our body. And
Mhm.
so it's nice to
Mhm.
have a daily practice of that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
How did all of that land for you?
Oh, just so wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, just
Mhm.
yeah, some. Yeah, really great, really great conversation today and learning. Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Awesome. Awesome.
my feedback is 100% love it. Yeah, and that it's really aligned with this course and that I'm
Okay,
glad
cool.
you made a week out of like a session out of it because yeah, I think it falls at a good place too in the course, like
Yeah,
kind of tying things together.
cool.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for your
yeah.
reflections. And yeah, if anything comes up or
Mhm.
you have any questions, like
Mhm.
I would be happy to explore further. And if you wanted to do a consult with me just to learn more about like
Mhm.
what minerals we need, how to balance them, like
Mhm.
potassium. If you're feeling called to potassium, one of the greatest sources of potassium is cream of tartar.
Mm.
And so people use that as a thickening agent, but it's a really
Mhm.
good food source of potassium. And I just put it in my
Mhm.
water.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dairy products like
Wonderful.
whole milks also
Mhm.
have whole or raw milks, even better,
Mhm.
have a lot
Mhm.
of, I think you said you're lactose intolerant. Maybe you're not anymore, but
Not anymore, but I yeah. Yeah. I still kind of stay away. Like I don't like buying milk at the grocery store, but sometimes I will at the market from like yeah,
hmm
just like yeah.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. But yeah, dairy like good dairy. Um
Good
yeah.
dairy.
Yeah. That's
And
good.
yeah, it all comes back to like where we source our food, right? And
Exactly.
hmm which is
Yeah.
tough. It can be
Yeah.
tough. It's a confusing thing.
Yeah.
It's which
Mhm.
is why for the longest time I just grew all of my own food. But
Yes. I'm getting
sometimes
there.
I
Yeah.
know. And I
Yeah.
I was there and I left it to
Mhm.
come here and I'm like, "Okay, I gotta
Yes.
this is really important to me. I have to have this back in my life."
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
always, as always, for
Yeah.
showing up and being here and
Mhm.
bringing your experiences. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate you having you here.
Thank you.
hmm
I appreciate being here.
hmm
Mhm.
Have a beautiful week.
Thank you. You
hmm
too.
Bye
Thank you,
bye.
Emily. Bye bye.
hmm